Hello, church history friends. My name is Barb Walden, and I am thrilled to be here to welcome you to the final lecture in our fall lecture series on this exciting Giving Tuesday. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you are as ready as we are to hear the latest on the Smith-Larsen Daguerreotype. Now, joining me today are a few familiar faces to the fall series. My co-host, Peter Smith, who serves as an active board member for the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation and co-director of our annual Historic Sites Bus Tours. As I've said before, friends, you have not lived unless you have traveled on a 10-day tour with Peter Smith. He's a blast. And in addition to Peter, we have Lexi Frazier, who's joining us tonight as our other co-host. Lexi is a former student in the Alma Blair internship program. She's awesome, and we couldn't have these online programs without her. Welcome, Lexi. So glad you're here. Now, as we shared during the November 16th lecture, this is an exciting campaign season, and we have a fall campaign happening. It's up and running, and even better, the Board of Directors will match your donation for the first $15,000 in donations that are received. On top of that, for Giving Tuesday, today, the Board of Directors is offering to match the first $5,000 received today. We are incredibly fortunate to have a board so generously committed to the work of the foundation. Thank you, board members. Your matching gift inspires generosity, and donations received throughout the end of the year, friends, will support the ongoing maintenance and preservation expenses of all 5 Community of Christ historic sites. Your donations also fund the Alma Blair internship program and help young adults serving at the Kirtland Temple and the Joseph Smith Historic Site. Your giving supports our online programs like tonight's lecture, in addition to the winter book series, our annual bus tour, and special events throughout the year. We can't thank you enough. So if you are interested in doubling your donation tonight and supporting the ongoing preservation efforts at these significant places of Latter-day Saint history, follow the QR code that you see on the screen. Lexi will also drop the online donation link and our mailing address into the chat for anyone who wishes to donate. Again, your generosity truly makes a difference, friends, and I hope you'll consider a donation this Giving Tuesday. Another awesome happening this holiday season is the Christmas tea. Our friends at Liberty Hall will host their annual Christmas tea on Sunday, December 10th. The afternoon includes a number of musicians and choirs. There's activities for the kids and more. The Christmas tea will take place from 2 to 4 p.m., again on Sunday, December 10th. And lastly, before that Christmas tea, just a few days before that tea, we are hosting an online event. So mark your calendars for an exciting event happening next Thursday on December 7th. We are hosting an online program that's going to feature a number of great storytellers sharing Christmas stories from Community of Christ history. So we will hear about a Christmas ball that happened in 1840s Nauvoo. We'll hear about Joseph Smith III dressing up as Santa Claus, much to the delight of his children and grandchildren at Liberty Hall. Hear about the youth at the Children's Home in Lamoni, serenading their friends with Christmas music, friends who were suffering during the holidays. We'll hear about community events and a Christmas tree at the Plano Stone Church, and so many more Christmas stories from church history. So like our online lectures, you'll need to register for this special Christmas program that's happening on December 7th. Peter will drop in the link where you can be among the first to save your online seat. It's a storyteller's program really that you don't want to miss during this Christmas season. So I hope we'll see you all next Thursday. Now, joining us tonight is our friend Lachlan Mackay. Lachlan is a familiar face in our lecture series, and he first presented on this historic image with his friend and fellow researcher, Ron Romig, back in August of 2022. You can find the video of that awesome lecture that Ron and Lach did on our YouTube channel as well as our website. Locke's connections to the historic sites and church history reach farther back than August of last year. He was the first paid full time site director at the Kirtland Temple when he began working at Community of Christ Historic Sites in 1993. He continued as the site director there until 2002, when he began serving as director or team lead, overseeing all 5 Community of Christ historic sites, a position that he has held for over 2 decades, and we're very fortunate that he continues on strong. In addition to overseeing the management of the historic sites, Locke also serves as a member of the Council of 12 Apostles for Community of Christ. So welcome, Locke. I'll turn things over to you as we are all ready to hear about your latest findings on this historic daguerreotype.
Thank you, Barb. As Barb mentioned, Ron and I presented right after the publication of our article. We have continued, of course, working on it. Turns out that I have a lot more time to research during the pandemic than I do post-pandemic, so our progress has not been as speedy. And Ron has been working on some health challenges for the last 9 months or so, but doing well on the road to recovery. So we hope that our pace picks up soon. Again, I'm going to share with you not what was published in the article, but some of the things that we have learned since then. Ron, one of my best friends, my best man at my wedding, almost everything I know about church history I learned from Ron. So just deeply indebted to Ron for his friendship and support. So just a very brief review. So the Smith-Larsen Daguerreotype came down through the Smith family, apparently Joseph Smith III to Fred M. to Lois Smith-Larsen, you see here in Nauvoo, with her son Dan, my uncle. They're in the Smith family cemetery again. You also see an image of Lois placing a wreath on Emma's grave in 1939 there in Nauvoo. After her mother was killed, Ruth Smith, Lois became, in effect, the first lady of the church. And she and her very large family ended up living on Holkey Road in what's now Eastern Independence, on Fred M's farm. And when Fred passed in 1946, many of his personal effects that had not gone to the church, including significant church artifacts, many of his personal effects just passed into the possession of his daughter, Lois. She gave, not long before her death in 1992, to my Uncle Dan a number of Smith artifacts, including a monogram Joseph Smith III pocket watch, as well as a second object that Dan believed to be a pocket watch. You see front and back images here, but the mechanism that you would push down to open it was not functioning. It was bent slightly. So Dan couldn't get it open in 1992. He put it away in a safe and forgot about it for 28 years. In the earliest days of the pandemic, though, he got back into his safe, bumped into this object, and started trying to get it open. This time he was successful, and as I think most of you already know, discovered not the face of a watch, but the face of a man. He called me that morning, March 20th, I think it was, of 2020. With his permission, I shared the image with Ron, and that set us off on multiple years of researching this image. We concluded, based on both objective and subjective investigative approaches, that this is an image of Joseph Smith Jr. Not in the article, but something that we and others have done since, some subjective facial analysis. So this is just based on, we think, we feel, but it's kind of interesting, comparing the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype to other Smith family members. So you see here John Smith. This would be Joseph Sr.'s brother, so Joseph Jr.'s uncle, left and right, and then the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype in the middle. I think I see some familial characteristics, but everybody's going to interpret that differently. But I think I see some family similarities there. Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mom, It seems to me that kind of the deep set eyes feel familiar. You see Joseph's younger brother, William. Again, the eyes somewhat similar, it feels like here, as well as maybe the off-centered cheeks and mouth. This one for me was particularly striking. One of Joseph Jr. and Emma's sons, Alexander Hale Smith, left and right. Smith Larsen Daguerreotype in the center. Something that Ron and Henry Inouye, who had helped us in the 1990s on some of our visual image research, had concluded early on is that there were some challenges with the 1928 identification of Joseph and Hiram. We had talked about that or published it early, but I've never really pursued it. And there's been some significant discussion about that. So let's spend a little time on that. And it's something that we have focused on more recently. It's important because people want to compare the Smith Larsen Daguerreotype to skeletal remains, the skulls, and I believe they're probably using the wrong skull. But let's talk about why. Just a quick review. Joseph and Hiram are murdered June 27 of 44. They are buried secretly in the cellar of the unfinished Nauvoo house, about where the little white stone building is in that top left image. They're there for a period of months, then moved even more secretly and hidden under what was apparently sometimes called a bee house. And it seems likely that they were also then moved for a time to Hibbard's Grove or Hibbard's Woods, while Emma fled to Fulton, Illinois, as the Battle of Nauvoo was breaking out. And then at some later point, the remains brought back, hidden again under the bee house you see here, where they were for decades. Emma later told her children, or told their children, that the graves were not far off the corner of the homestead. And Emma apparently left detailed instructions on where she wanted to be buried. This comes from B.H. Roberts, who visited Louis Bideman in 1884, published later. But according to Roberts, Bideman told her that she, Emma, is buried by the side of her former husband, Joseph Smith, and his brother Hiram. A day or two before her demise, Emma Smith called those to her who would likely dispose of her remains after her death and directed them to go to the southeast. Now, the account says southeast. It's really southwest, but almost no one gets direction right in Nauvoo because the river is on three sides of the peninsula. So just a word of caution, you got to be very careful about paying attention to direction. And in this case, whether it was, I can't imagine it was Biden, and I think Roberts probably just got it wrong. So it's southwest corner of the old Smith homestead. And in a direct line from that corner, take 25 paces and there dig down, and they would come upon a brick vault. She desired that her coffin be placed by the side of that vault. So Emma apparently left instructions to be buried next to Joseph. Here's what Joseph III said from his memoirs. I waited upon the mayor at once and told him that I proposed to bury my mother on my own premises, near where the body of my father, her husband, rested. So there's apparently an intentional effort to place Emma next to Joseph. So Emma, remember, had talked about them being buried not far off the corner of the homestead, but eventually all the outbuildings are long gone. The Mississippi River is dammed at Keokuk in 1913. The water by the 1920s is encroaching on the Smith properties. And Fred M. and his daughter, Lois Smith Larsen, visited Nauvoo for a reunion, a church reunion, multiple day, in 1927. And while there, Fred decided if they were ever going to find the graves, now was the time. And he had been told by his father that if they could locate the location of this little outbuilding they'd been hidden under, long gone, if they could find the outbuilding, they would find the graves. There had for decades been a desire to appropriately mark or memorialize the graves. And so that was part of the motivation. The rising water was a concern. But they also, I think, were a little annoyed about persistent rumors from coming from the West that the bodies were not buried in Nauvoo, but were instead taken to Utah in golden coffins and were buried into the Salt Lake Temple or something like that. So for all those reasons, they start searching. They had W.O. Hands, a civil engineer, conduct that search. And here's a note from Hands, 17 January 1928. We have found the bodies of the martyr Joseph and Hiram and Emma, Joseph's wife, at 2:10 p.m. We uncovered the head of Hiram, easily recognized by the bullet hole just below the right, I've added the emphasis, the right eye. Right alongside and south of Hiram, we found Joseph. So this account says that the person that is on the north side of the B house is the person they identified as Hiram. Here's another account from Hands. Before I left Independence, President Smith had indicated by placing his finger upon the side of his face, just below his right eye, and had told me that I should find the place where the bullet that killed Hiram had entered his face. I found the hole where the bullet had gone through so clearly defined as to make identification positive and complete. Here's another account, this one from Frederick Madison Smith, who drove up. It was a long, complicated journey, got stuck in the mud many times, but made it to Nauvoo. Going down into the grave, I had, with Brother Hand's help, closely examined the skull of the body lying to the north, and in it were plainly to be seen the effects of the bullet which had killed Hiram. That identified both bodies. The identification was complete. Yet another one. This is an affidavit for Nauvoo citizens, 1928. A hole was clearly seen in the front of the skull, below the eye, and at the right of the nose of the body lying to the north. So it's abundantly clear that they are basing their identification on what they understand as the impact of the musket ball on the right side of the nose of the person on the north. So just to help you understand, again, the setting, you see the homestead, top left, the white and brown structure, the reconstructed B house to the right, approximately where the lilac bush is where Emma was buried, just in front of the B house there, next to the B house. So it's puzzling to me that Emma would leave careful instructions to be buried next to her brother-in-law, Hiram, which of course I think is not what happened, but let's keep going with that. So in 28, these are tracings of photographs. We're out of respect, not using the actual photographs for this program, but we do have them and use them when researching. So in 1928, they identified Joseph's remains, you see on the left, and Hiram, 1928 Hiram there, almost complete, but you see a notch, a little triangular shaped break just to the right of the nose. That's what they identified as the impact of the musket ball. So again, 1928 Hiram, almost complete, little break to the right of the nose. Here's Hiram's death mask, though, and you'll immediately perhaps recognize a challenge, an issue. Hiram is hit not on the right side of the nose, but on the left. So Fred M. Smith had seen the death mask in 1904 when visiting his cousins in Utah. So maybe he had not seen him since, and he's working from memory. It's also really easy to get left and right confused. You know, your left, my left, your right. Just don't know what happened, but somehow they had turned it into the wrong side of the nose. So here's, again, Hiram's death mask on the left, and then the remains that they identified as Joseph in 1928 on the right. Significant damage to the face. And you see really evidence of very heavy brow ridge in both images. You see Joseph's death mask on the left, the 1928 Joseph remains on the right, identified in 28 as Joseph. I don't think the brows are a good match. So this is part of what led us in the 90s to conclude that they're likely misidentified. But I think, with the brows particularly, a much better match. So with the help of Paul de Barth, who reached out to his friend, Dr. Jane Boekstra, we asked her to examine photographs of the remains. Dr. Boekstra is a member of the American Academy of Sciences. She's an anthropologist and archaeologist. She basically pioneered or created the discipline of bioarchaeology, which applies biological anthropological methods to the study of archaeology. She pioneered skeletal analysis regarding injury, disease, and mortality, and has authored more than 20 books and 200 articles. Because of her interest in Nauvoo in the past and some work she'd done there, she was gracious enough to agree to help. She pulled in Dr. Catherine Van Schaik, the Harvard Medical School postdoctoral research affiliate of the Initiative for the Science of the Human Past at Harvard, an affiliate at the Center for Human Bioarchaeology at the Museum of London, and maybe my favorite, a consultant paleoradiologist for the Juvenile Mummy Project. They also pulled in their osteology students to help us with this mystery. Again, they were working with photographs. I have used software to doctor the photograph here. They were looking at actual photographs. And here was their conclusion. We all agree that the skeleton on the right in the image shows evidence compatible with the surgery. Remember, Joseph had surgery as a child on his left leg, compatible with the surgery and sequelae, that the impact of the trauma discussed in various documents, including diaries and published accounts for Joseph Smith's early experience with typhoid osteomyelitis. They continued, it is possible that part of the excision occurred at the medial aspect proximal metaphysis of the left tibia, and thus the femur lengthened to compensate. I don't know if the left patella is fused to the lateral condyle of the left femur, but it could be. There may be also secondary arthritis at the left hip. A disclaimer, I do not know how to pronounce many of these medical terms. She said brows on Hiram's death mask are much more like the middle burial. They also had images of the skulls, not just this image. And then the middle, now she said middle, but I've cropped Emma out of this. The middle, so left in this shot with Emma cropped out, individual is consistent with Emma's death mask, with Hiram's death mask, and possible cause of death. The one on the right is consistent with Joseph's history of illness and surgery. So our hope, though, is to find a wide variety of folks in different disciplines to help us with this kind of analysis. Folks far and wide and beyond just the history community. So we tracked down Dr. Thomas Andrew. He's a forensic pathologist, formerly the chief medical examiner for the state of New Hampshire. He's a board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology, currently with White Mountain Forensic. Dr. Andrew came back saying, given the location of the entrance wound, your description of the ammunition used, and its apparent firing through a closed door, it is inconceivable to me that the ball did not completely penetrate the soft tissue of the face. And he describes the images you see there, the Hiram images, to damage the facial bones of the skull, consistent with what is seen in images 3971, which is the 1928 Joseph. He continued, I agree that the brow ridge of images 3966, 3968, so Hiram Smith, is stronger and more prominent than that of Joseph. So it seems increasingly likely that the brothers were misidentified in 1928. So I think really Hiram on the left, really Joseph on the right. Again, this is important because people trying to work with the daguerreotype image, some of them are trying to use the skull to do some comparisons, and I believe they're using the wrong skull. It's also important because sculptors for decades have been using these as well, and I think they're probably using, again, the wrong remains. Another question came up after we published about whether the daguerreotype might be laterally reversed. So daguerreotypes flip back and forth as you take them early on. They would flip. There were corrective lenses available pretty quickly with mirrors, but if this is really an 1844 image, corrective lenses were available, but not widely out there, and they were probably expensive, not easy to transport. So good questions, were they reversed or not? And the same question has been asked about the portrait for years, most often because the ring on the right hand, and people think that it's a wedding ring. Now, I don't believe it is a wedding ring, but often people think it's a wedding ring, should be on the left. Therefore, the portrait is reversed, which must mean it's based on a daguerreotype, which is reversed. Really good question, which we had concluded pretty early on, where the portrait was not reversed and the daguerreotype was not reversed. I'm a little embarrassed that it took me this long to think about the fact that we needed simply to look at the buttons. For centuries, male clothing has overlapped and buttoned one way, left over right, and female clothing is the opposite. So if in these images the clothing is reversed, if the buttons and the flaps are reversed, that suggests that they're likely reversed images. But you see here that the oil portrait, it's not easy to see, but there are buttons on the vest, and that is the traditional male overlap, suggesting that the portrait is not reversed. Because the brow frown line, we've often called it, that crease off-centered between the eyes, matches between the daguerreotype and the portrait. We had originally, again, concluded that they were not reversed. But again, if the portrait is not reversed based on the clothing, that suggests the daguerreotype is not reversed. We can't see enough detail. We can't see buttons on the daguerreotype, so we can't use the daguerreotype itself to make that determination on the buttons. But the fact that the clothing on the portrait is not reversed, apparently, and the frown line matches, suggests that the daguerreotype is also not reversed. So how about a Lucy image? This one is going to come into play a little later. This, you see a close-up of the face of a portrait of a person that was found rolled up in the Mansion House attic in the 1950s by Henry Moore, an antiques dealer and somebody who's an artist. And he was helping us with the restoration of some of the Nauvoo properties. He had found this canvas, again, rolled up in the Mansion House attic, took it home to restore, realized it was more than he could do, and forgot about it for decades. As he retired and was cleaning out his shop in the 1990s, found it, brought it to Restoration Trail Foundation here in Independence, where my mom worked at the time. And so as a result, I saw photographs of this portrait. And then not more than a few weeks later, Ron and I, because of my mom's relationship with Lynn and Lorene Smith, Lorene had invited us in to help find church artifacts in their home. This was after Lynn's passing, that they were going to make available to the church. So I spent weeks and weeks, maybe months, carefully going through the home. And in the attic, I found in a trunk, in an envelope labeled Mother Smith's Pictures, which in this context would be Clara Hartshorn Smith, David Smith's wife, youngest son of Joseph and Emma. So Joseph and Emma to David, to Albert A. Smith, to Lynn Smith. So this image, which obviously is what the portrait is based on. So this in Lynn and Lorene Smith's attic. Ron and I did quite a bit of research in the 90s and eventually concluded that this is Lucy Mack Smith, published in the Mormon History Association Journal on that. So the Lucy image, which again we're gonna bring back later, but you see the overlap on the dress, not easy to see, but an overlap on the dress, and it is the traditional female overlap. So again, suggesting that the daguerreotype here is not reversed. There's a better shot of that dress. Traditional for females, right over left. So it seems very likely that Smith-Larsen daguerreotype is not reversed, very likely, and that the Lucy daguerreotype is not reversed. So after publication, Dan Larsen pulled in Robert Boyd, a very talented photographer, to try and help us capture higher resolution images of the daguerreotype. And Robert uses a technique where he sets up a camera in a light box and shoots hundreds of images just at very slightly different angles, and then uses software to stitch those images together. By doing that, it allows you to see through some of the scratches on the daguerreotype plate, the metal plate. So you see a much higher quality image, Robert Boyd's image there on the right versus the earlier images that we had been able to work with. Again, after cleanup, and for those of you who read the article, you'll remember that it was very challenging to do a lot of this research because much of it took place at the height of the pandemic and everything was shut down. So to find talented professionals to work with this was not easy. Again, one of the early images we were able to capture, and then the new Robert Boyd image. But Robert noticed something really interesting because of the high res images. He noticed that in the catch light, in the eyes of the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype, so the catch light is the term for the reflection in the eyes. In the catch light, Robert realized you could see the daguerreotypist. So those black lines in the middle of the eyes, kind of triangular shaped, that is the reflection of the daguerreotypist, likely under a hood, which I didn't believe that was a thing, but I Googled it, and sure enough, I ran into other references, other discussions of catch light. Then I reached out to a friend, Jim Doty, very talented photographer, asked him if he had any modern examples. I'm amazed that with, you know, what must be hundreds of thousands of photographs he's taken through the years, he sent me one within an hour or two. This was a receptionist in his doctor's office in Columbus, Ohio, years ago. Jim is standing in front of a bank of windows and took a picture of this young woman. You see the result, top right. But when you zoom in to that top right image, you see Jim reflected in her eyes. Really cool. But it also caused us to start thinking, wait a minute, what if we start trying to compare the catch light in other Nauvoo daguerreotypes in our collection with the catch light in the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype? Can it help us connect these images somehow? And so Robert came to Independence, was kind enough to shoot. This is Emma with baby David in her arms, so probably 1845 or so. You see the result, the catch light, and it's not the same. So that suggests that this daguerreotype of Emma was not taken in the same room, likely not by the same photographer, but definitely not same room, same window placement, that kind of thing. Okay, well, let's try Joseph Smith III as a teenager taken in Nauvoo. And you see the result, and it's not the same. So again, we can't place the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype in the same setting, the same room as this one. But then we asked him to shoot the Lucy daguerreotype. So this is a carte de visite, let me clarify. But it's a little rectangular photo on cardboard, but it is a photograph of an earlier image. And in this case, that earlier image is a daguerreotype. We worked long ago with Grant Romer, who's a daguerreotype expert, now retired at the Eastman House in Rochester. And he helped us understand that this was a photograph of a daguerreotype. And at the time, in the 90s, we thought it was maybe a Daguerrean coat button. But we now realize it is a Daguerrean locket insert. So just like the little 16th plate with a round image punched out of it on the Smith-Larsen daguerreotype, what you're seeing is another 16th plate round daguerreotype, apparently, but not placed in a locket. So this is a photograph of that locket insert. So the quality on a carte de visite, the resolution is not as high as on a daguerreotype, but we still thought it was worth a try. And here's the result. And as you can see, it looks pretty similar. And the portrait, bottom right, that you see there, we believe was hanging in the Nauvoo temple by January of 46. This, I think, is the quality too high on this portrait to be likely David, so we think it's earlier. And there is a portrait of Lucy hanging in the temple in early 1846. So that suggests that the image it's based on, that daguerreotype, is quite early. You see very similar catchlight there. And when you put them together, it's very, very similar. So this is either an extraordinary coincidence that two separate Smith family lines had access to the technology to do these round daguerreotypes. The Lucy one, again, by 46, January 46, the painting is in existence, suggesting the daguerreotype is even earlier. And then not only do they both have access to the technology, they also seemingly are taken in the same setting, in the same room, based on the where the light sources are in the reflection in the eyes. So it could be an extraordinary coincidence. I don't think it is. I think this is compelling evidence that these are prominent Smith family members. So some of our next steps, now we realized that we just didn't know enough about 19th century portraiture, but Nancy Ross and Lauren DeSalvo, who at the time were both at St. George, I think Lauren has now moved on, but they are art historians, and they were kind enough to spend quite a bit of time trying to understand 19th century American portraiture. And there's surprising little research on it, but they did quite a bit of work on it. And what they came away understanding and helped us understand is that 19th century American portraiture was basically being patterned after 19th century English portraiture. And the point was not to do a photographic copy of the person. That is not why you had your portrait painted. The point instead was to make a statement about you. It was to make sure people understand that you were wealthy, for example, and that was often symbolized by the landscape behind you, or that you were stable and powerful, which was often symbolized by a column standing next to a column or a partial wall, which both of those things you see in the Joseph and Emma portraits. What that helped us understand is that we shouldn't expect the portrait and a photograph of Joseph Smith to be looking exactly the same, because the portrait's point wasn't to look just like you're looking in the mirror. Again, it was to make a statement, and they would make you younger, generally, hair straighter, nose thinner, more refined looking, lips thinner. So that was really helpful. We also, though, need to learn more about David Rogers. That has been challenging. There's just not much out there on him. Folks like Micah Christensen at Anthony's Fine Art in Salt Lake have been kind enough to help us a little bit. And it's just very difficult to find other Rogers portraits. There are supposed to be a few out there. I've yet to see good images of them. Mike also helped me understand that you can learn a whole lot by pointing a black light at portraits, which I was able to do with the Joseph and Emma portraits, and you can see what is retouched and what is not. So what's the original painting versus what is the 1950s conservation that was done here in Kansas City. And they're really relatively intact, but clearly some overpainting as well. We need to learn more about Lucian Foster. Lucian is the likely daguerreotypist. He is the branch president in New York City who learns the art of daguerreotype, moves to Nauvoo, arrives 2 months to the day before Joseph is killed. We've got bioarchaeologists, we've got forensic pathologists, We still are looking for the help from a forensic anthropologist. And we have been looking for help from maxillofacial surgeons. Those are the folks. It's a highly specialized form of dentistry. Um, if your lower jaw, your teeth, the bottom part of your face is impacted, they're the people who help put it back together. So have a really in-depth understanding of facial trauma. We also want to keep trying to do some stuff with facial recognition. We recognize that this is kind of right on the edge of what that technology can be used for, but still think we might be able to learn something. So late breaking news, as in maybe an hour before this presentation started, I got an email from one of the maxillofacial surgeons that was kind enough to offer to help. I noticed that Will Perez is with us tonight, and it was a connection through Will, so I really appreciate that. I've only read their report once, and I want to stress that they are very careful with lots of qualifiers, as you would expect and hope for. They're very careful, and so we'll share more detail after we have a chance to digest this and talk to the folks. But this is Dr. Scott Bullock and Dr. Sean Davis, Southern Utah. These gentlemen, I think, probably both in St. George. So again, a more detailed report, and they're very careful, lots of qualifiers. I just want to make that clear, but here's kind of their conclusion. The complexities of the evaluation of these images are varied and significant. The traditional Hiram skull is very difficult to correlate with the type of injury described historically, as well as those seen in the death mask. So again, they seem to be reinforcing the conclusion of others that they are likely misidentified, at least on the Hiram skull. They continue, the condition of the traditional Joseph skull, again, the more complete one, could result from either a high velocity projectile or from severe and repeated blunt trauma. That comes into play because Janetta Richards said that as Joseph was lying on the ground at the well, some hit him in the face. Her husband, Willard, would have been there. So that suggests more than one. We don't know if it's a fist or the butt of a gun, but we're trying to figure out, okay, if the injury to the right of the nose is not from the impact of a musket ball, what might it be from? Could be from being hit in the face. Some hit him in the face. So the condition of the traditional Joseph skull could result from either high velocity projectile or from severe and repeated blunt trauma. However, with blunt trauma, it would be expected that sizable bony fragments would be present unless completely broken down by time and poor preservation. So again, let me clarify that they're saying the not very intact skull could be high velocity projectile or repeated blunt trauma. But if it was blunt trauma, you would expect to find more of the remains. They say in the report that the projectile with a higher velocity would likely cause the remains to fragment in a way that wouldn't be easy to find. So they conclude, in our opinion, it is very likely that the skulls are misidentified. However, there are other less compelling factors that are difficult to rule out completely. So again, I appreciate they're being very careful, but seem to be also suggesting that the remains were likely misidentified in 1928. We have Hiram likely in the middle, marked as Joseph, Joseph on the north, marked as Hiram, Emma on the south, next to Hiram. I think I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you, Locke. You have surely given us a lot to consider, and I love the way that science, technology, and history are woven together in these latest findings. I also like that we got a hot off the press earlier today surprise. That was well worth the price of the ticket. Thank you so much. Locke, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with as the final lecture in our fall lecture series, or perhaps any homework assignments?
Well, you saw the list of things we need help with, would love help with. And it is Giving Tuesday. We very much appreciate your support. Very kind of you to be with us, and anything you can do to help financially is greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you, Locke. And I'm sad that we'll now bring our evening program to a close. Thank you so much, Locke, for carving out time on this very busy Giving Tuesday to share your latest findings on the daguerreotype. And also a big thank you to Peter and Lexi for helping out behind the scenes and making it all look so easy. And lastly, we share our thanks to all of you, our dear friends in the audience, our church history lovers and enthusiasts. Thank you for your generous support for this Giving Tuesday and your continuing love for a good story, love for preserving church heritage. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, although tonight was the last lecture in the fall lecture series, it wasn't the last program of the year. So I hope you will all join us next Thursday on December 7th when we gather online to share some of our favorite Christmas stories from church history. Follow the link that Lexi will drop into the chat to register for the program on December 7th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So until then, we wish you all a warm and wonderful evening and hope you continue reading your church history. Take care, everyone.